One of the topics near and dear to me is the subject matter of genetics, IQ, environment, and how all that is interrelated and how it interacts with each other. And not too long ago, Teal Deer had a podcast with one Bunny. I'm not really familiar with her, or was not at the time. Subsequently tried to get hold of her for a discussion about forensics, law, and cognition, but I have no means of getting hold of her because she's left YouTube, and a very difficult person to acquire, I can assure you. If it happens, I will let you know in the form of a podcast. In any event, they did a fairly thorough and detailed discussion of IQ and heritability and many issues related to the subject matter. And the comment section was abuzz, as is often the case in such videos, with a variety of comments moving in different directions. Now, it didn't appear to me at the time that there were very many people who were professing a belief in the sort of mystic nature of the brain or mind. That didn't seem to be a real issue, which I guess you could say is a small form of progress, a step in the right direction, as we move away from the understanding of the mind as a kind of mystical apparatus independent of the body. But there were people who still denied the many decades of testing and many different aspects related to the subject matter. And one of the things that kept on coming up, I noticed throughout the comment section, and in an exchange I had with a particular gentleman, was the plethora of analogies to physical training, resistance training, and athletics in general. The analogy, very general analogy, being, well, you can train the body to improve as well. And I want to kind of take all of this apart in this video, because I think mind-body, or cognitive versus somatic, it's a pretty complicated matter. And a lot of the analogies that are used are pretty simplified, overly simplified. And there are even disanalogies in many ways, in my humble opinion or view. One thing I saw that was kind of related to this mystic idea of the mind that I want to disabuse people of is this notion of IQ not being an intelligence test, or more precisely, there not being any way to gauge intelligence, any single way. Now, to the best of my knowledge, there's no singular way to gauge athletic ability. After all, there are many different subdivisions of talent within the broader category of what we would consider to be sporting or athletic ability. So let's just go with that. There actually might be. I've tried to find one, but I don't see any singular tests, and if I might be wrong about this, so inform me. Regardless, what we have in this world is a consensus that being able to do many different things in areas that we perceive as being related to athletic ability and being able to perform well in these areas indicates a high affinity for athleticism or a high athletic ability. For example, being quite fast, being able to sprint, being strong, being able to engage in long, arduous endurance activities. And these are all indications of varying abilities within the athletic domain. If you add them all up, eventually you will get an idea of what constitutes athletic ability. A person who is very quick, who has in a sort of white muscle fiber, fast twitch muscle fiber sense, has a lot of explosive power, can lift a lot of weight, this person would be deemed athletic by many, especially if it's significantly above what's perceived as average. This isn't actually too dissimilar to cognitive ability. Even if we were to make the case, or even if we lived in a world where IQ tests had no correlation with G, general intelligence, we would still live in a world where various activities were indications of greater than average intelligence. For example, if you were to find a successful hedge fund manager who engages in the activities of chess in his free time, as well as intricate programming, just as a hobby, we could surmise that he's a fairly intelligent person, significantly above average, because you don't see average people doing this. Likewise, if you were to see an astrophysicist who's also a professional chess player, I mean, these would be indications of intelligence, a type of intelligence that is not widely distributed throughout the human population. So even if we were to grant the idea that there's no single way to test intelligence and IQ has nothing to do with intelligence, there would still be multiple observations you could make, as in the case of athletic ability, that people are endowed with different abilities across a wide spectrum related to intelligence as well as sporting or athletics. So the idea that there's no way to gauge intelligence is just bunk, even without the idea of IQ tests, which, as Thiel pointed out in the video, it's very well researched by now. I mean, this isn't the purpose of this video to prove the validity of IQ tests. Watch the video, do the research yourself, frankly, because I'm trying to prove a different point here. You don't get a PhD in nuclear physics by being a dumbass, and you don't become a professional marathon runner by not having an abundance of slow twitch muscle fibers, for example. In fact, you could probably make the argument that no one with below average slow twitch muscle fibers is going to be a professional marathon runner or a world-class marathon runner. And the same is true for sprinters in the realm of fast twitch muscle fibers. And the list goes on and on. I mean, pardon me. What we have here is a world where different activities, intellectual, physical, manifest themselves in ways that we call either intellectual or intelligent or athletic. We see this. We see people who are less endowed in these different abilities across various spectrums, across various genetic populations. So the idea that there's no way of single test to measure intelligence, even if there weren't, even if IQ tests were bunk, this argument is bunk, because there are so many ways of seeing this through casual observation and other metrics. So I wanted to get that out of the way. But on to these, I think, somewhat fallacious arguments with bodybuilding or resistance training or more generally athletic ability. So resistance training, this idea that people can engage in resistance training and to train and improve their musculature and their strength. I think that's a pretty bad analogy. I don't think it's quite a disanalogy, but it's a bad analogy. But I think a more apt analogy for those who are promoting the idea that anyone can do activity X, that's essentially what this argument boils down to, is the idea in fitness and the more general idea that anyone can get lean. Now, theoretically, this is true. Anyone can get lean. And the reason why I want to disabuse people first of this analogy, which is actually a more apt analogy, and then move on to the idea that resistance training is a good analogy to mental training and how they're sort of interchangeable, because you hear this often, or you see this often written, is that on face value, this seems true. Anyone can get lean, which is to say anyone can lose weight in theory. When you actually examine the details that go into weight loss, it becomes a fair bit more complicated, to say the least, and this for a variety of reasons. Let's take the average person in terms of psychology. Let's say the person who is able to psychologically adapt to an exercise regimen, to a dietary regimen. Well, that's just in the realm of psychology. And there's a calories in, calories out, basic physics, yeah, that's true. But when people engage in weight loss for the first time, if they're actually more typical than atypical, they're going to see that macronutrient distribution in their particular dietary regimen, which is to say the amount of carbohydrates versus fats and proteins, is going to have an influence on their ability to lose weight in a more efficient manner or a less efficient manner. And so the question of is the simple sort of calories in, calories out, well, that becomes more complicated. Some people, for example, are very adaptive with regards to carbohydrates. They can lose weight with significant carbohydrates. Other people find they need to cut carbs significantly down. Some people need to cut them almost completely out in order to effectively promote weight loss. We're actually talking about fat loss. But I use weight loss because it's a sort of general term that describes the phenomenon. And so it becomes a question of, well, it's not just calories in, calories out. It's a lot more complicated because macronutrient distribution in a diet has important consequences because of the hormonal interactions, the different hormonal interactions related to macronutrient distribution. If you eat a big, fatty, juicy piece of steak with a side of broccoli and cauliflower, you're going to be promoting a very different response in the body to when you eat 5 loaves of bread and bacon and eggs. Those loaves of bread are going to promote an insulin response, and it's going to be completely different. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there are people with defective hormones. There are people who, for whatever reason, whose psychology, which psychology is physiology, but psychology just does not allow for the kind of discipline to engage in in order to lose weight, to get quote-unquote lean. So on the surface, the question, anyone can get lean is theoretically true, and presumably anyone could. Let's say if you could starve someone to death or near to death, you could force feed them at gunpoint. I suspect most, but not even all people, if you were to put a gun to someone's head every day and said, I'm going to shoot you if you don't maintain this diet and this exercise regime, maybe 95% of people would be in compliance with that. And there would be some people that psychologically, cognitively, neurologically would not be able to comply and would get shot in the head. So on the surface, the idea, it's true, anyone can get lean, but when you go into the dogged details of it, whether it comes down to macronutrient distribution, innate psychology, if the person has functional leptin production, which is the hormone that is primarily responsible for satiety and other things, there are a lot of issues at stake when it comes to weight loss. And this is only in the realm of something that is physiologically within the capacity of all people to attain theoretically. That is actually the analogy people are trying to draw when they say, well, anyone can get educated, anyone can increase his intelligence, this sort of thing. When we get into actual resistance training, it's a widely known sort of bro science truism that anyone can get lean, and I've just sort of debunked the idea that anyone can really, but in theory anyone can, versus not everyone can get big, not everyone can get muscular. And this is why this analogy that people then draw between resistance training and cognitive training is even more bunk than the one I just as a theoretical experiment promoted, because the other one, the idea that anyone can get lean, that's theoretically true at least. It's not true in the slightest in terms of resistance training. The number of factors that goes into resistance training to be successful in that, developing a impressive physique, for example, or even being strong. I mean, how the joints interact for a particular individual, tendon connections. That has an effect on leverage and thus individual strength. The number of fast-twitch muscle fibers, the number of muscle fibers, period. The muscle belly length, shape, all of these things factor in. And these are just vastly different between individuals. More to the point, there is although everyone, let's talk about hypertrophy, the growth of cells. Specifically, when we talk about bodybuilding resistance training, we're talking about the growth of muscle. Anyone can engage in resistance training with a proper diet and regimen, whatever proper means. Once again, there's a lot of variation here due to individual metabolic differences. The pathways are the same, just as in theory, the pathways to lose weight are the same. Calories in, calories out. can have a surplus of calories, lift weights, you'll get big, whatever, right? More than meets the eye here. No, not that simple. Because some people need significantly more calories. Well, that still follows the basic principle, right? Well, that probably is an indication that there are other limitations in that person. So hypertrophy, yeah, there are sort of universal channels for the body to achieve muscular hypertrophy. However, those channels are limited to all sorts of individual limitations, which I've cited: number of muscle fibers, shape, length of muscle bellies, tendon connections, bone structure. That there's the aesthetic aspect, and so on and so forth. Endogenous serum testosterone levels. All of these play a role, and there are going to be some people, while you have an average, who are going to fall within an average and not be terribly responsive to weight training, and also not be poor at it. There are going to be people on the other end, and then people who are just exceptionally responsive to it, who have the shittiest diet and they grow muscles anyway. And here, and I'm going to get to the point, you see many more limitations than the theoretical model of just losing weight. Because yes, theoretically anyone can get lean. Yes, some people would actually need a gun put to their head, and even then a few people would fail at that. But no, not anyone can get big or muscular. It's just a fact. Spend some time in the gym, read up on the subject matter. And I see this analogy being drawn more often. Now, it might be true that you can improve your neurological condition. You can become more educated. However, the analogy, they're both failed analogies, actually is more apt with regards to resistance training, because there are harder limitations on this. It seems obvious by now that individuals have different numbers of specific, there's a general number, but specific number of neurons, different brain structures. We know that Einstein's brain had a somewhat different structure to the general populace, for example. This is no different than somebody having, a plethora of fast-twitch muscle fibers in his quadriceps, right? Effectively. And so there are going to be hard limitations for someone who doesn't, right? Or the kind of person that has a runner's build. He's going to excel at one thing. And of course, there are different, I wouldn't say different types of intelligence, but there are different categories subsumed under G, general intelligence. All these things point to something that is very difficult to change. Now, interestingly, and here's where things get complicated, interesting, hypertrophy is just the growth of cells, in this case muscular hypertrophy. You talk about something like hyperplasia, which is the actual splitting, division, and emergence of new cells. That's something quite different. And it's been known in bodybuilding circles that growth hormone in conjunction with insulin, like growth factor, IGF-1, as opposed to just steroids, which just promote hypertrophy at an accelerated rate, can actually cause hyperplasia, that is the emergence of new cells and potentially new muscle fibers. But that is the induction of exogenous IGF-1 and exogenous somatotropin, HGH, human growth hormone. A lot of risks associated with that too, because there seems to be evidence to suggest that promotes aging as well, more rapidly, but neither here nor there. The point I'm making here is that when you actually get changes to people's physiology, it requires hefty and very powerful exogenous external intervention in the form of somatotropin or IGF-1. This seems more analogous to the type of interventions that would be required in order to enhance intelligence and promote intelligence. Now, of course, I'm indirectly talking about genetic engineering or enhancement. And at this stage, we still don't know the exact genes, pleiotropic or not, associated with intelligence. But it's going to need to be external. And the current means the current means we have available, that is standard educational procedure, do not, one, take into account, by way of analogy, the different metabolic, different individual metabolisms people have. That is, it is true, people learn differently, they have different aptitudes, and some people are more carb sensitive than others. Some people need to go on 20 carbs a day in order to lose weight effectively, and some people can stick to 500 a day, provided they have a caloric deficit. Which leads people to all kinds of strange conclusions that, if they could do it, then other people can do it too in the same fashion. That's just not true. Likewise, it's not true for intellectual activities or education. So at the very least, you could say our educational system, which is very generalized, very uniform, and lacks precision, specificity, and nuances, is poorly tailored to the individual's needs, because individual brains will be different, function differently. Just as anyone can theoretically lose weight, that too will be a different beast for different individuals. Although there will be general guidelines, general learning tools, or even general learning pathways in the brain that are analogous to calories in, calories out, and different hormonal interactions with macronutrients. Fair enough, but it's just not. We don't have the resources to even tailor it to that level, whereas an individual can spend the time learning about his individual metabolism, and so on and so forth. The more worrying thing for people, I don't worry about it because I just kind of accept reality, but the more worrisome thing for people is that all the evidence points to dramatic exogenous external interventions of the sort related to, say, in terms of muscle hyperplasia, required to actually enhance people neurologically beyond a certain point. So yes, you can educate somebody. Let's say somebody scores 100, 101, pretty much average, on an IQ test. Well, you can do a fair bit. You can make that person more educated. But you're not going to turn him into a professional bodybuilder. By that I mean you're not going to get a Stephen Hawking out of him, or an Einstein, or certainly not Jonathan Neumann, or a Blaise Pascal, or any of these people, because they just don't have it in them at this current stage. Now, who knows? I'm not disallowing for the capacity in the future for some crazy non-genetic neurological technique that involves stimulation, or it's possible. But we would be talking about something that would be directly interventive and really have a direct impact on things, rather than these, what I call workarounds, and hence the title of the video. What we're talking about are workarounds. So a person who engages in resistance training will be better off than he would otherwise be if he didn't. That's true in terms of strength and musculature, and at least limiting and slowing down age-related muscular atrophy. But there will be hard limits there. And we need to concede, if we actually want to improve people's lot in life, let's say that's our goal, we want to make people smarter and more educated, you first have to concede that not everyone at this stage of the game is in a position or possesses the capacity to do so. Like we concede in the gym, on the gym floor, that not everyone is going to get big and muscular and ripped, and that not everyone has that capacity. We can even concede that in theory, yes, everyone can get lean, but in actual practice, it's not true. There are so many bad analogies here that I see constantly in comment section and throughout the internet. And I think it's important to disabuse people of them, because, frankly, we need to be honest about this. If we actually want to improve people's lot in life, particularly neurologically, cognitively, we need to concede that at this stage of the game, there are very few things that we can do that will dramatically alter people's intellectual outcomes in life. Standard education doesn't do it because it's just not dramatic enough an intervention. In fact, you might want to separate intervention from workaround, because it's not an intervention at all in this sense. It's a workaround. It's a way of saying, well, you're the type of guy that can put on 3 kilos of muscle mass for the first 2 or 3 years of your weightlifting, and you're going to dramatically slow, which is not that good, by the way, slow down after that. Your progress can slow down after that. Likewise with intellectual cognitive ability. As usual, I would suggest that people get in touch with reality, and once you accept reality, we're going to have a much better foundation for, if that's one's goal, for improving people's lots and improving their cognitive abilities. Denying the strongly heritable factor in intelligence, the genetic component, the hard limitations that people have, it's not helpful. It's not going to push the envelope further. In fact, it's only going to hold us back. You can say we do what we can. Well, yes, but if you really want to push the envelope, you got to acknowledge certain things, and it's just, I don't see this happening. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. I wanted to cover some of these basics and why these are not good analogies ultimately. Yeah, more to come in the future if I'm still alive. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.